or really do anything to kind of tailor this for y'all, please let me know. I'm more than glad to. I think that's kind of one of the nice parts of having a group this size, and especially I know there's a couple folks who recently bought a home, it sounds like. So if you have any home specific questions or things that are kind of more tailored to your situation, feel free to ask them. Um, I can go ahead and introduce myself. My name is Devin Filicicchia, use he, him pronouns, and I'm the electrification specialist at the city of Missoula. It's a pretty odd position. It's split 50-50 between building electrification work and transportation as well. So today I'm not going to touch on the transportation piece, but just know that vehicle and transportation electrification is a big piece of my work. So if you have any questions related to that, you can always feel free to reach out to me. I'm glad to discuss them. Currently working on an electric vehicle infrastructure plan for the city. Um, and then on the building side, I can go ahead and share my screen. I do a lot of home electrification work and supporting folks in that. So um, yeah, I think our conversation today will just kind of barely scratch the surface. A lot of this is pretty technical or can get pretty technical. So if you have any questions about specific topics, or if you just want to follow up with me for a meeting or a quick email question, I'm always glad to support y'all. And one last thing is that even though I'm housed in the city, our electrification work or electrification campaign is countywide. So even if you don't own a house in the city or don't live in the city, that's completely fine. We work pretty closely with our partners at the county, and the city, county, and Climate Smart Missoula have this joint campaign called Electrify Missoula. So it's something that we're all working on together. So don't worry about where you live. For a little roadmap of today, plan on presenting for a little bit and then we'll have some time for questions. But again, feel free to speak up as we go on. The first thing I'll share is some thoughts about like why we're even talking about electrification. I'll present what I think is a helpful framework of how to think about your home. We'll dive into some specific pieces of like what to consider within your home. I'll share some funding opportunities that exist. And lastly, I'll share some considerations for renters, as well as some things that are transferable for anyone. Um, do want to acknowledge, though, that I think a lot of these things are really tough to do as a renter. So that's kind of why a lot of the things I'm focusing on today are kind of bigger home system pieces that make a lot of sense if you own a home. But if you're a renter and are willing to advocate and connect with your property manager, I think that that's a good solution too. So, starting off on like the question of why we're even talking about electrification, I want to start with emissions and particularly those associated with what's been termed natural gas. If you're not running off electricity, most of the appliances and systems in our home are running off some sort of fossil fuel. That could be propane, that could be oil if it's an old furnace, but typically it's natural gas, which is mostly methane. And molecule for molecule, methane has an 80 times greater of a greenhouse gas impact than CO2 does. That's within its first 20 years. So when thinking about like total emissions, methane or natural gas has some pretty significant emissions associated with it. Currently, thinking about our community, 23% of our emissions come from residential uses. Residential uses are mostly homes, and the other big chunks of community emissions come from commercial buildings and transportation. When we're thinking about emissions as a whole, I think it's really important to think about our efforts to clean the grid. So as of today, about 58% of Northwestern Energy's electricity comes from carbon-free sources. So it's mostly hydro, but there's also some solar and wind in there. Um, but I think what's really interesting about electricity that we forget often is that our electricity mix can get cleaner over time. So it's possible that 10 years from now, we could have even more clean electricity And that's certainly a goal of our community. And fossil fuel sources will always be just that. It's not like a fossil fuel powered furnace isn't going to get cleaner over time. Maybe the furnace itself could become more efficient, but it's going to be pretty marginal. Another piece is that we have a community goal of 100% clean electricity by 2030. So it's certainly something that the city and county and Climate Smart are working towards to have clean electricity. There's a couple other pieces that I think are brought up pretty often. And yeah, we talked already about gas stoves. And I think another piece related to this is health and indoor air quality considerations. Um, Gas leaks can happen at all stages, and that's not just from like drilling and transport, but that can also be end use. And methane is dangerous to breathe. There's an indoor gas leak. So the health piece is something a lot of people consider when thinking about electrification. And I think in general, a lot of people look towards electrification because of just efficiency. A lot of electric appliances are a lot more efficient than their gas counterparts. Before I move on to like the home kind of as an ecosystem and yeah, looking at individual pieces of the home, does anyone have any questions about electrification and kind of the framework behind it or the reasons why we're thinking about electrification so far?
There's one question in the chat from Roshana. She asked, would you recommend going fully electric? What are some contingencies for if the power goes out and all of your stuff is electric?
Cool. Thanks for highlighting that. I didn't have the chat pulled up, and I'll be sure to do that in the future.
Oh, no
Um,
problem.
that's a really good question, Shana. So I think in general, I would recommend going fully electric. Um, when thinking about when the power goes out, like if that's kind of one of the things holding folks back from going all electric, I think it's important to consider that a lot of natural gas appliances, so like your furnace or your stove or a bunch of other things that are natural gas, like still don't work when the power goes out. So thinking about like resiliency of a home, um, just because something's electric doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to be less resilient than a gas furnace or something like that. So I do think that part of like nationwide or thinking about electrification on a larger scale, an important piece of that certainly is like backup power and thinking about grid resiliency. But on a local level, in general, I think most people's electric appliances are just as reliable in terms of power outages as their gas appliances would be. Of course, there's a couple ways around that. But I think in general, if there's some pieces that you're concerned about, there's a lot of solutions to maybe like a generator that could just power one thing. But I think in general, especially in a place like Missoula where we have a pretty reliable grid, um, there's not many concerns in terms of full electrification when thinking about power outages. Um, and I think something that's going to come up in general is like I will recommend going fully electric. But I think the bottom line is, you know, it's a new appliance or a new system in your home, and costs are certainly a big piece of this. So I think kind of it's weighing costs and what you're willing to pay, and if things are ready to be updated with maybe a new system. Thanks for that question. Now I'm going to shift a little bit to thinking about the home as an ecosystem. And I think this is really important. Um, when we think about the home, it's not the best idea to think about like one piece disconnected from everything else. And I think that's especially when we're thinking about, especially true when it comes to electrification. So it's best to start with a whole home energy assessment. So you essentially can make a plan for your home. I think a lot of people like to start with an energy audit, and that's a really useful way to kind of figure out where you're at. Energy audits are kind of complex. We don't have many people, individuals who will do them in our community. There just isn't enough demand. But your utility provider likely has some energy audit options. Northwestern and Missoula Electric Co-op now both do in-home energy audits. Those aren't always going to be as comprehensive as one that you would find from uh, someone who does that as just their field of work, but I think it's a really good place to start. City and county staff are always glad to help. Of course, like I think an energy audit I gave you over the phone is going to be nothing compared to someone walking through your home and kind of assessing the systems. But it's helpful to kind of start there at least. And there's also some good do-it-yourself options, like the Department of Energy has a really useful tool. And I have a resource I'll share at the end that kind of has links to all of these solutions as well. So don't feel like you need to be frantically Googling stuff. I think in general, when I'm thinking about the whole home, the best place to start is considering what fuels you're using for the appliances and systems. So is your heat fueled by electricity or gas? Um, is your water heater electric or gas? Do you have a gas or electric range? Um, I think this is a really important place just to learn your home. Frankly, unless you spent a lot of time around your water heater, which I suspect most folks haven't, you may have no idea what's fueling it. So it's a good time to learn your home and kind of investigate some more. Um, I think that understanding what fuels are you're using in your home is important for a couple reasons. One, and the first one that comes to mind for me is that fuel switching, so switching from something that's gas to electric, can honestly add some costs to your project. Not only because you may need to cap a gas line or do something like that, but you may also need more electrical panel capacity. So something to think about and a good place to start, especially thinking about your budget. Um, and one piece I want to just put a pin in is solar. I think that if your house is already all electric, it may be a great time to be thinking about solar. It could help offset your electricity costs or something like that. But frankly, I think a lot of folks see solar as this like really exciting thing because it's kind of cool to power your home off energy you produce. But simultaneously, if your house is like mostly gas, I don't think solar is the best place to start. So kind of think about what you're using first, and then maybe if you have extra funds, then is a great time to consider solar. But I think it's really fun and exciting, and that's why a lot of folks start there and don't really see the cost savings that they're hoping to see. Um, One other piece is thinking about upgrades you'll need to make regardless. So, is there something in your home that needs to be replaced soon? Do you have a 30-year-old furnace, or do you have a really old roof? Now is the best time to be thinking about those things for a couple reasons. One, just so that like it's part of your electrification plan. And I think another great reason is so that you have time to do the research before replacing something. Um, if you have a gas hot water heater, for example, right now, and you don't have hot, like it goes out and you lose hot water tomorrow, it's going to be so much faster to like replace it with another gas hot water heater that'll last for another 20 years. If you haven't already done your research. So it's always hard to be like, maybe I want a new appliance or maybe I want a fuel switch in that moment of panic. So I just encourage folks to be thinking about those things early and often so that, when a gas appliance goes out, you have all of the pieces in place to think about replacing it with something electric or more efficient. And one last piece in this I want to discuss is um, that you should be thinking about your home envelope or kind of how leaky your home is during this assessment as well. And I bring this up because a lot of these systems are super efficient. So there's some really efficient heating and cooling systems out there. But at the same time, if your home is really leaky and loses a lot of air and there's a constant draft below your door, the most efficient system probably won't keep you that comfortable as that gas furnace that's putting out a bunch of hot air every day. So all of this to think about, just I would encourage folks to like not consider any piece separate. Really, I think it's critical to be thinking about the home as a system. before I go into a little bit deeper dive of each specific piece of the home that we can consider, any questions here or any, um, has anyone ever had a home assessment or any experience with that? Cool. Um, just one note, I think now is a pretty exciting time for home assessments, especially through the utility. For the past 4 years, I think Northwestern was just doing virtual home energy assessments, which, as you can guess, I don't think are the most useful. But I think after COVID, folks are beginning to, or Northwestern's beginning to provide some in-home energy audits, which are a little helpful. Wendy, I saw your hand up.
Yeah, we actually had one done quite a number of years ago through Northwestern Energy. It was through LEAP,
Hmm.
which is their
Yep.
low-end energy assistance program. But once they do it, that's it for the life of the home. So even if we sold the house and another homeowner came in, so that's something like if you're considering doing that, you may want to, you're gonna have to check with them to see if the house has already had one done. And it is available to renters too, which we wish we would have known at the time, but it's pretty cool when we had it done in person and our windows that we thought were really bad ended up being really great. So we had no major leaks in our house, so. But they did put in extra insulation in our roof and in our basement walls, so it's pretty cool.
That's cool to hear. Wendy, I'm curious, when they did that audit, did they do something called a blower door where it was kind of like a fan that was placed in
Yeah,
your front door?
yeah, that's
Um,
exactly what they did.
uh, that I think is probably better than a lot of the home energy audits folks will get today. I don't think Northwestern's doing those blower door tests, but I
Oh,
think just a plug, folks at the city and county are working to hopefully find some contractors that can do those blower door tests. Um,
yeah.
and not to, I don't want to get too into the weeds, but what a blower door test is essentially, it pulls all the air out of your home and then it finds how long it takes for all of the air in your home to be replaced, essentially. So if it replaces quickly, that shows that you have a lot of leakage in your home. And you can, like Wendy mentioned, pinpoint where that's coming from. And I think it's a really useful piece, especially thinking about where to start insulating if that's if your door needs to be insulated, if it's your windows and things like that. So
Our house
yeah,
was actually so good that they said to leave the bathroom fan on for at least a half an hour so that it would pull all that moisture out of the room because it wasn't going anywhere. It was just staying there. I was kind of surprised to hear that.
yeah, that sounds like a pretty tight house. That's cool to hear. All right. I'm going to dig a little bit into other like these specific pieces to consider, and kind of the hierarchy that I like to think about in order. So once you've assessed your home, then I think it's a good time to think about what you want to change. And frankly, this is a very personal question. I would ask yourself what your goals are, and be honest with yourself. I think a lot of times it's really easy to say like, oh, I want to reduce my home emissions, and that feels like super noble. But the reality is, if saving money is a bigger priority, that's important to keep in mind. Um, so I typically like to start with the heating and cooling systems of our home, and that's because they constitute about 50% of our home energy use. So they're critical to think about. Um, and in these systems, this can include things like building envelope, include things like Wendy just mentioned of some roof insulation, or air sealing, and things that can instantly reduce your energy use. So let's start with the biggest chunks. The second biggest chunk is water heating. Again, I think it's constantly forgotten about. but it's responsible for about 20% of our home's energy use, depending on the type of appliance. Um, so I think another plug that a lot of these things are important and not necessarily like the most fun. Um, Changing your water heater isn't as exciting as getting a new like refrigerator or dryer or stove or something that you use every day with your hands. But I think it's really important to consider when you think about your monthly energy bill and like the overall emissions of your home. Um, and then lighting's also an important piece. And then also those large appliances, the refrigerator, washer, dryer, stove, and pretty much anything else you can think of that you plug in or could plug in. Um, this is also a piece where you could be planning or thinking about like the vehicles or methods of transportation that you use. I think if you're planning or if you could see yourself purchasing an electric vehicle in the future, if you're thinking about an electrical panel upgrade, you want to make sure that it includes some additional capacity for charging an EV at home or something like that. Any questions about kind of this hierarchy of framework of sorry, hierarchy of thinking about things? Well, yeah, just to reiterate, I think that important piece is think about like energy use, which is not always as fun as like the things that maybe are exciting to change. But digging into heating and cooling, the 50% of our home energy use, when it comes to conditioning your space, heat pumps in general are the efficiency champion. They're wildly efficient. And air source heat pumps are typically the most common. So before I go any further, can anyone like give me a really high level definition of a heat pump? Or like, have you heard the term before? I'm just curious about like folks' relationship with the word heat pump. Kind of a newer term. Cool. So I think it's tough because heat pumps, I think they're very aptly named. Different from other sources of heat, um, heat pumps are heat movers and not makers. So heat pumps just move heat from one place to another. They don't create heat. And that's part of what makes them so efficient. I think a really good example of this technology of the heat pump is our refrigerators. So you plug your refrigerator into a wall and they use a heat pump to pump the heat out of the refrigerator and out of the freezer into the space behind it. Um, so for heating and cooling, a heat pump in your home just moves warm air from outside your house into your house to heat it. And to cool your home, it moves warm air from inside your house to outside. So that's why heat pumps can both be AC or heating. You don't need like a furnace and an air conditioner. Um, and part of what makes them so efficient is they are not creating any heat. Um,
Devin,
and
I have a question.
yeah,
This like confuses me and I don't know why. But like so we have mini splits where I live. And when you say like they move heat, I guess I just don't understand because if I'm like cold, then I turn on the heat pump. It's cold outside. So where does the heat come from or how does that work?
yeah, that's a really good point. And I think part of what makes this confusing is that even when it's like 32 degrees outside or 0 degrees outside, technically there's still heat in that air. So a heat pump, in theory, can draw heat from a source until it's 0 degrees Kelvin. So even though it is very cold outside and much colder than it is in the summer, the heat pump can still push heat from outside to inside. And they do that with refrigerant and pressurizing air.
Okay, that
But
makes way more sense. There's way more chemistry involved. Okay.
yeah, but I think that's a good point, and I have a tendency to oversimplify it. But Yeah, so it's moving heat, but sometimes that heat is kind of hard to find. It's a lot more obvious when it's a hot summer day and it's pushing the heat in your home out. But in the winter, it's doing the opposite and it's just working a little bit harder sometimes. Um, to further either clarify or confuse this like heat pump conversation, I just want to acknowledge that like the word heat pump just refers to the technology this system uses. So Taylor just mentioned mini splits, and a mini split is essentially just a type of a heat pump. You've probably seen them, I don't know, they're common in restaurants, common in a lot of smaller, newer builds, but it's just kind of a big cassette that sits on your wall, and it's called a mini split because it's split half of the units inside, half of it's outside. Um, and it's kind of like a non-ducted heating and cooling system. But there's also heat pumps that work with ducted systems, and there's heat pumps that take air from the ground. And the word heat pump can be used to it can be used to describe a lot of different things. So just want to clarify that it can get confusing, and I think it's just helpful to remember that heat pump is just referring to the technology that can take a lot of different shapes. Um, any questions about that? I know that was kind of a deep dive and can get confusing. Or any terms I can define or um, well, thanks for bringing up mini splits, Taylor. I think that's probably the most common form of heat pumps for heating and cooling. Um, and then another piece that I think is pretty technical, but we don't have to get too far into. I just want to show how efficient these are. So the way that this is done with heat pumps is with this term called coefficient of performance. This number is a ratio of heating capacity to total power input. So I think a really simple way to think about this is a COP, coefficient of performance, of 2.5 means that you generate 2.5 kilowatts of heat by using 1 kilowatt of electric power. So essentially, you're putting in 1 kilowatt and you're getting 2.5 kilowatts of heat out. Air source heat pumps have a COP typically ranging from 2 to 4. And a lot of other heaters, so electric resistance heaters or gas furnaces, have a COP of 1. So for 1 unit of power energy you put in, you get 1 unit out. So since they're not creating energy, they're super efficient because they're just moving that heat. So all that to say is that in general, heat pumps can be up to 4 times more efficient than the current system that you have. If you have a gas heater, it may not mean 4 times cheaper, but if you have like electric baseboard heaters or some sort of electric resistance heating, it could be 4 times cheaper if you're moving from electric to electric. Good question, Amanda. So do you have a heat pump and still have a furnace and an AC unit? Kind of depends. In general, I think if you think about a new build right now, a new home, it's going to be efficient. It's probably just going to have a heat pump. Um, but in Montana, since temperatures do get pretty cold, it's probably going to be a heat pump with some sort of integrated backup heat in it. So it'll be highly efficient most of the time, and then maybe when it's that week in the winter where it's -20, some sort of backup electric resistance heat may kick on. Um, that said, I think in retrofits or people thinking about putting a heat pump in a home that currently doesn't have one, um, some folks do choose to keep their furnace just as a source of backup heat. You don't have to. You can go one way or the other. But I'm thinking about my house, and we have a big furnace in the living room. I think that a heat pump wouldn't go in that exact spot, and I don't know what else we would put there. So maybe that would stay, not be turned on all year. And then if it gets really cold for 1 week out of the year, it's a good cheap source of backup heat or something like that. But um, in general, heat pumps are they probably, or they would replace an air conditioning unit for cooling, but you may have some other source of backup heat. Maybe that's an existing furnace, or maybe that's backup heat built into the new system. Did I answer your question? Cool. Yeah, and I think that leads me kind of directly to this next point. Um, yeah, I think I touched on all of it, but in general, for home retrofits, you can typically just leave your existing heating system, um, but it kind of depends if you have ductwork, and depends on a bunch of different things, but you have some options is what I'm getting at, and I think cost is a big piece of that too. And then, yeah, just to reiterate, I think building envelope is critical here. Heat pumps are efficient, but if you've ever stood in front of a gas furnace, it puts out just like very hot air. And a heat pump is really good at maintaining temperatures, but it's not good at taking room from 50 degrees to 80 degrees in a couple minutes. So it's pretty important that a house is pretty well insulated there. Any questions? And I'm glad to come back to, but any questions before I move on to thinking about water heaters?
Yeah, Devin, what's the cost difference then? So if you were wanting to put in, say, mini splits or a whole new unit, like how much more do you feel like you would have to invest to choose this option rather than what the old standard was?
Um, I think I think it depends. I think in a new build, the costs are pretty comparable. So if you're thinking about just installing a mini split or just installing like a furnace that puts out heat at one spot, the costs are probably going to be similar. But if you're taking away a gas furnace, there may be costs associated with like capping a gas line, or closing off some like the air vents that go outside from that. So a couple of those things could increase the costs. And frankly, like everything else, it depends a lot on the size of your home. The mini splits, which are just like a big cassette that sits on your wall, on a wall that reaches the exterior, those are pretty affordable, and they're a great system. But the thing is if your home is 2,000 square feet, that one mini split won't cover the entire home. So if you have a smaller house, I think it's pretty affordable. And typically, if you have some sort of existing ductwork, it's probably a comparable price. Um, but all this to say, I think there's a lot of things that go into it, and each individual home kind of shapes that answer significantly. One thing, though, I will mention is that there's a lot more rebates and incentives and like additional money out there to support these highly efficient electric products, where if you got a gas furnace, you may get a little rebate if it's very efficient, but it's probably not going to be as significant. But there's a good bit of money out there to support these efficient electrification projects. Cool. Now, that we've kind of laid that groundwork, just going to touch on water heating pretty quickly, again, because this is about 20% of the energy use in the home. Um, in general, heat pump water heaters, to clarify, a heat pump water heater is an electric water heater, but it has this like heat pump unit on the top of it. So it's using that same technology that we just talked about, but instead of taking warm air from outside and putting it inside, it's putting that into the water tank. These are very efficient, so sometimes 3 to 5 times more efficient than a typical electric water heater. So it can really bring down those costs in your home. But I think like everything else, they do require some additional considerations. One example I think is with fuel switching, moving from a gas water heater to an electric one. You may require a larger power receptacle. So it may require a 240-volt outlet, which is the same as regular electric water heaters, but different than most gas water heaters. And then location, venting, and noise are also things to think about. When we're thinking about pumping this air, it's taking warm air from the ambient space around it and pumping into the water heater. So typically, if you have a water heater in your like bedroom closet, it may make your bedroom a couple degrees colder. But if it's in the basement or somewhere that you're not spending a lot of time, I don't think that's a big deal. But yeah, a couple other things to consider, and I think contractors are very aware of all of these. One thing I will mention about water heaters is that I think right now they probably have the most amount of rebates to support them. Like when thinking about anything else, it's the only local rebate that we have. So right now we have a $575 rebate for heat pump water heaters, and that's in the city and county. And we're hoping to up that rebate in the coming months as well to provide a little bit more money. So lots of funding there. In some cases, I think Northwestern Energy has a $3,000 rebate. So if you're thinking about a water heater, certainly encourage you to reach out or at least consider a heat pump water heater, just because they're wildly efficient, can bring down your water heating costs, and a lot of money is out to support them. In general, moving to kind of funding these projects, I think it's really important in general to think about initial costs versus operating costs. A lot of these appliances may be a little bit more expensive than a less efficient version, but they could pay for themselves really quickly. So it's a little bit of math, but there's a lot of tools out there that can help you do that assessment. And I think like a classic example similar to this is like a metal roof. When you buy it, it's a lot more expensive than a typical shingled roof or an asphalt roof, but it'll last maybe twice as long. I think it's similar here with like a heat pump water heater is going to be a higher upfront cost typically, but it'll pay for itself in a couple years. So I think that's an important piece to think about, especially when we're considering funding them. And there's a lot of like required upgrades that may need to go along. So maybe if you're installing solar, you have to think about is your roof in good condition or do you need a new roof? If you're putting in a bunch of electric appliances that were formerly gas, you may need to upgrade your panel capacity. This isn't always the case, but it's certainly something to think about when you're pricing out these projects. Oops, sorry. Couple categories of funding pieces to support it. One is tax credits. I'll touch on these briefly, but I'm glad to expand on them. A lot of these things are currently eligible for a 30% tax credit through the Inflation Reduction Act, and that's a federal program. There's a lot of rebates, like I mentioned, available. And there's also some financing opportunities available. So the Department of Environmental Quality in Montana has a revolving loan program, and Clearwater Credit Union, for example, has some pretty good low interest loans for home efficiency and solar and other pieces like that. Any questions I can answer relating to funding these projects or any of the rebates or credits that are available? I know those can get kind of tricky, but I don't want to spend too much time on them if folks aren't ready to dive in yet.
I think I was just going to mention there's been a lot of stuff up in the air, especially in our current political climate, about what will happen to like the IRA and tax credits, at least at the federal level and stuff like that. And so if you're thinking about it, I would say do it. Do it now while those are still available. But I don't know if you have any insight on that, Devin.
No, I think you bring up a really good point. Really good point. I don't think that we should like act like the world is falling, but I think if your timeline is considering one of these upgrades in any time from now to 2 years from now, I would probably encourage you to try to get it done sooner rather than later. I've been kind of tracking. I think the piece that is most at risk are these 30% federal tax credits. And I've been tracking them pretty closely, and it would require a budget revision from Congress. And so far, I haven't seen anything that would um, address like the tax credits for heat pumps or kind of these um, maybe more mundane home systems. But I have seen a couple bills introduced to scrap the solar tax credits, the EV tax credits. I don't think they've gotten much traction, but I think time will tell what happens to those bills. So yeah, I think that those 30% tax credits are certainly the thing that feels uh, most at risk these days. And yeah, I'd be remiss if we didn't have some considerations for renters here. Either and I think these also can like apply to folks who aren't renters. And maybe if you're not looking to do some big home system adjustment project, I think these can be smaller things that homeowners can do too. Um, I think in general, the most helpful thing for me, at least as being a renter, has been just like advocating for energy efficient appliances. um, I think a lot of these resources aren't familiar, or a lot of people aren't familiar with them. So, for example, I've kind of shared today about like the resources that are available for, rebates for heat pump water heaters and things like that. But your landlord may not be. So, I don't think it ever hurts to do some research for them. And like, if you know you're getting a new water heater, it doesn't hurt to pass along some information. And it's up to you how like pushy you want to be there. I think it depends on the person and their relationship with their property owner. Um, Also, I'd be thinking about like who pays the bills. So if the utilities are paid by the landlord, efficient electric appliances are often an easy choice. And if you can make that argument that like they will be saving money by one of these investments, they could also add value to the unit or improve your comfort. They have a lot of co-benefits associated with them. Um, And I also think it's important to like try to control what you can. Um, some of the most common are like building envelope improvements. You've probably seen like these windows with an insulator kit on them. It kind of looks like just a piece of saran wrap stuck to the window to help insulate it some. Those are a great resource to stop leaky windows. You can also like add weather stripping around doors. Um, and one piece that I think is important for everyone, not just renters, is thinking about what's termed passive heating and cooling. Um, a really great example of this is a lot of folks do this without knowing what it's called. But in the middle of the night in the summer, you can open all your windows, let the cool air in, and then throughout the rest of your day, your home may be a pretty comfortable temperature. So thinking about ways to like passively heat or cool. This could also include like window coverings or other things to keep out heat in the really warm parts of the summer, or opening your blinds in the winter to let that sun in. Um, for cooking, I think it's a little bit more tough for renters. Um, you can do things like purchasing a portable induction burner. Um, and I think this is something that folks who own homes can do too, especially if you're curious about induction cooking. You can rent one at the library. Um, Missoula Urban Development, has induction burners that you can try out. So I think that's a great option if you both don't want to use gas cooking, or if you're like unsure about buying an induction range, if you want to play around with it a little bit before. There's places to borrow them, or you could just buy a portable one. Um, and then, I think there's kind of the answers that um, you hear a lot, and I think line drying your clothes in the summer is still a great solution. But I wouldn't spend too much time on those things that maybe you've heard all of your life, but it doesn't hurt to consider them. Um, any questions about these considerations for renters here?
just add, Devin, when you're talking about like passive heating and cooling, this may be something that is everybody already knows, but like when you're thinking about cooking, like maybe using your crock pot or Instant Pot or something that doesn't heat up your house rather than cooking in your oven, especially those hot summer days. I think we probably do that already, but that is something to consider.
Yeah, it's a very good point, Taylor. And I'm sure everyone's experienced like making a big meal in the heat of the summer and it just being the most miserable experience ever, trying to cool off the place after. So yeah, like barbecue grills and other ways to avoid introducing heat in places you don't want. It's always a good call. I have a couple like miscellaneous resources I just wanted to share kind of briefly. Um, One is Missoula County's Home Upgrade Hub. It's a newer program that's part of Missoula County Extension. And this was just a screenshot of one of the resources that are available. But they have a really great DIY home assessment worksheet. They're also a great resource if you have any questions similar to myself. And they have a lot of just online tools that I would encourage y'all to peruse. And in a minute, I'll drop a document with all the links to these sites. But the Home Upgrade Hub in the county is great. They're located in the same building that the Butterfly House is in, over by the fairgrounds. So they're a great place if you wanted to pop in, ask some questions, or anything like that. Another piece that I wanted to share is this website called Rewiring America. And yeah, I think they're a great tool in general. This was just an example of like a plan that you can create. It does some cost estimates, and you can kind of share your current situation of like what your water heater is now. And um, I think it's a really great tool. And what's nice about Rewiring America is virtually all the information I shared today is in this website in some way or another. So if you wanted to learn about local rebates for a specific thing, that exists on their website as well. So it's a really good tool. I spent a lot of time on there and it's a really well-designed website. So it's kind of fun to play around with. And then the last one is Electrify Missoula. I mentioned that at the beginning of the presentation. But I wanted to pull out a specific piece of this that I think is underutilized sometimes. And it's this far right tab, success stories. And they're videos or articles about families who did these projects. And sometimes it looks at their whole house. Sometimes it just looks at like them purchasing a new water heater or something. But I think it's a really good opportunity to hear people's stories, especially in Missoula. A lot of people tell you how great their heat pump is in the winter, or they'll tell you how great their EV is for commuting around town. But I don't know, I think a good place to find some local anecdotal stories that can help shape your decision. So give me 1 second. I'll share that resource document I was talking about. But we got a few minutes. Are there any other questions I can answer? Anything I can go back to that folks want to discuss further? All right. I just shared that link in the chat, and I think I may have to reshare it. I don't know if the links are working. I don't think they're working. I'll send this to all of y'all via email, but yeah, try to compile all the resources in one place. And I'll also make sure that everyone has my email address, phone number. I'm more than glad to answer any questions as they come up, big or small. If you're a renter and looking to make some changes in your home to improve comfort, we can chat about that. Or if you're like a homeowner thinking about a big project and don't know where to start, I'm glad to support y'all in any way that I can. Yeah, I'll hang out for another couple minutes, but thanks for your time and appreciate all the thoughtful questions and taking some time out of your day.
Thank you, Devin. Thanks so much.
Yeah, of course.